A dusty Colt revolver pulled from a grandfather's forgotten dresser drawer recently crossed an auction block and hammered down for $850,000. That is more than double the price of the average American home. You could literally be holding a retirement fund in an old shoebox right now, and you wouldn't even know it. Across the country, families are inheriting antique firearms and handing them over to local pawn shops for a few $100s, completely unaware they are giving away six-figure assets. They walk right past fortunes at estate sales because they don't understand that this market operates by a completely different set of rules. The most valuable revolvers aren't just old. They possess specific hidden characteristics that make them outperform stocks, real estate, and gold. I am going to show you exactly which models matter and the hidden clues you must look for before selling your family's history. Let me start with the foundation of this entire market. The reason certain revolvers have become so valuable isn't just about age or rarity. It's about something much more specific, and once you understand it, everything else makes sense. The key lies in what collectors call the golden era of American firearms manufacturing, roughly from 1860 to 1940. During this period, companies like Colt, Smith, and Wesson, and Remington were producing revolvers with a level of hand craftsmanship that simply doesn't exist anymore. When you pick up a Colt single-action Army from 1873, you're holding something that was individually fitted by skilled craftsmen who spent their entire careers perfecting their trade. Every part was hand-finished. The timing was adjusted by feel. The trigger pull was smoothed through careful stoning of internal components. Compare that to modern production firearms, which are manufactured using computer-controlled machinery and assembled on production lines. There's nothing wrong with modern manufacturing, but it creates a fundamental difference in both quality and collectability. Modern production runs are measured in hundreds of thousands of units. A popular modern revolver might see 200,000 examples produced over its lifetime, but that Colt single-action Army from 1873, total production over 40 years was only about 350,000 guns, and most of those were lost to wars, neglect, or everyday use. What survived to today represents maybe 10% of the original production. Of those survivors, only a small fraction are in condition that collectors consider desirable, and of those, an even smaller number have the specific features that drive prices into six-figure territory. This is where most people get confused about firearms values. They think it's simply about age, like antique furniture or vintage cars. But the firearms market operates more like the art world. It's not just about when something was made, but who made it, where it was made, what features it has, and what condition it's in. Take serial numbers, for example. Most people see a serial number on an old revolver and think it's just a manufacturing code. But to collectors, that number tells an entire story. It reveals the exact year of production, the specific factory where it was made, and often the original configuration. A Colt single-action Army with a serial number in the early production range, say under 50,000, can be worth 10 times more than an identical gun with a later serial number. Why? Because early production guns often have subtle differences in design, manufacturing techniques, or materials that make them more desirable to collectors. But here's where it gets really interesting. Within that early production range, certain specific serial number ranges are worth exponentially more than others. Guns made for the United States military have different markings and features than civilian guns. Revolvers shipped to specific dealers or sold in specific regions command premium prices. There's an entire science to reading these manufacturing clues, and most people have never heard of it. But understanding just the basics can help you spot the difference between a $3,000 gun and a $30,000 gun. Let me give you a specific example that shows how dramatic these differences can be. In 2020, Two Colt single-action Army revolvers sold at the same auction on the same day. Both were made in 1876. Both were in similar condition. Both were the same caliber and barrel length. One sold for $12,000. The other sold for $140,000. The difference? The expensive gun had United States cavalry markings and could be documented to a specific military unit that served in the Indian Wars. The cheaper gun was a standard civilian model with no special history. This is the kind of knowledge that separates casual collectors from serious investors in this market. And it's why families often make costly mistakes when dealing with inherited firearms. Most people's first instinct when they find an old revolver is to take it to a local gun shop or pawn shop for appraisal. But here's the problem with that approach. The average gun shop owner knows modern firearms very well, but they're not necessarily experts in historical collectibles. A pawn shop might offer you $500 for a revolver that's actually worth $50,000, and they wouldn't even realize their mistake. It happens all the time. And once that gun disappears into the collector market, you'll never see it again. The smart approach is to document everything before you talk to anyone about selling. Take detailed photographs of every marking, every serial number, every design feature. Research the manufacturer and model online. Check completed sales on auction websites to get a sense of current market values. But even then, you need to understand how to interpret what you're seeing. The firearms market has its own language, its own grading standards, and its own network of specialists who understand specific types of guns. Condition is absolutely critical in this market, more so than almost any other collectible. A revolver in near mint condition might be worth 50 times more than the same gun in poor condition. And the difference between very fine and excellent condition can double or triple the value. This is where most people need professional help. Firearms condition grading is a skill that takes years to develop. Factors like original finish percentage, bore condition, mechanical function, and replacement parts all affect value in complex ways. But there are some basic warning signs you can learn to spot. Any revolver that's been refinished or restored will be worth significantly less than an original gun, even if the restoration work was expertly done. Collectors pay premium prices for original factory finish, even if it's worn or faded. Replacement parts are another major value killer. A Colt single-action Army with an original grip frame might be worth $20,000, while the same gun with a reproduction grip frame might be worth $3,000. And the difference isn't always obvious to untrained eyes. This brings us to one of the most important trends driving values in this market. As the generation that grew up with these guns passes away, fewer and fewer people know how to identify original versus replacement parts. The knowledge is literally dying with its holders. At the same time, a new generation of collectors is entering the market. These are often successful professionals in their 40s and 50s who grew up watching Western movies and have the disposable income to pursue serious collections. This generational shift is creating a perfect storm for values. Supply is relatively fixed since production of most collectible revolvers ended decades ago, but demand is increasing as new collectors compete for the same limited pool of desirable guns. The result has been steady price appreciation that's outpaced most traditional investments. According to the major auction houses that track these things, quality collectible firearms have appreciated an average of 8% annually over the past 20 years, with some categories seeing much higher returns. But like any investment market, there are sectors that perform better than others. Military-marked guns have been particularly strong. Guns with documented historical provenance continue to set records, and certain manufacturers have developed almost cult-like followings among collectors. Colt is probably the best-known name in collectible revolvers, and for good reason. The company's early single-action revolvers, particularly the Model 1873, are considered the gold standard of American firearms collecting. But Colt made many different models over the years, and values vary dramatically between them. A first-generation single-action Army from the 1870s might bring six figures. while a third-generation gun from the 1970s might be worth only a few $1,000s. Smith & Wesson has its own devoted following, particularly for their early break-open revolvers and their famous military and police models. Remington produced some highly sought-after guns during the 1870s and 80s, though they're less well known among casual collectors. The key is understanding which specific models from which specific time periods drive the collector market, and this is where research becomes crucial. Every major manufacturer has reference books written by experts who've spent decades studying production records, patent dates, and design variations. These books are invaluable resources for identifying and valuing specific guns, but they're also complex and technical, written by collectors for collectors. The average person inheriting firearms needs simpler guidance to make basic identifications and avoid costly mistakes. Here's what you need to know as a starting point. First, photograph everything. Get clear images of all markings, including serial numbers, manufacturer stamps, patent dates, and any military or government markings. Second, measure the gun carefully. Barrel length, overall length, and cylinder capacity all affect identification and value. A Colt single-action Army with a 7.5-inch barrel is much more common than one with a 3-inch barrel. Third, note the caliber if it's marked on the gun. Some calibers are much rarer than others, and this can dramatically affect value. A .45 Colt is common, but a .44 Russian or .38-40 is quite rare. Fourth, examine the condition carefully and honestly. Look for signs of refinishing, replacement parts, or modifications. Check that all serial numbers match between the frame, cylinder, and barrel. Fifth, research comparable sales before talking to any potential buyers. Auction websites, dealer websites, and online price guides can give you a baseline understanding of current market values. This research phase is critical because once word gets out that you have a potentially valuable gun for sale, you'll be contacted by dealers and collectors who know exactly what they're looking at. Having done your homework protects you from lowball offers or outright misrepresentations. The firearms market also has some unique characteristics that don't apply to other collectibles. Federal law requires that transfers of firearms go through licensed dealers in most cases, which means you can't simply sell a gun on eBay like you would any other antique. This creates a specialized network of dealers, auction houses, and collectors who understand both the legal requirements and the market dynamics. Working with the right people in this network can make the difference between getting fair value for a gun or leaving money on the table. Reputable auction houses like Rock Island Auction Company, Heritage Auctions, and Julia Auctions specialize in collectible firearms and have expert staff who can properly identify and value unusual guns. Their catalogs are also excellent resources for researching current market trends. But auction houses charge sellers premiums, typically 15 to 20% of the sale price, and the process can take several months from consignment to payment. For extremely valuable guns, this is often worth it because auction results establish market value and attract serious collectors worldwide. For more common guns, working with a knowledgeable dealer might make more sense. The best dealers in this market are specialists who focus on specific types of guns or specific time periods. They know their markets intimately and can often sell guns more quickly than the auction process allows. But choosing the right dealer requires care. Some dealers specialize in modern sporting guns and may not understand the collector market for historical pieces. Others focus on military surplus and might not recognize the value of rare civilian variants. The key is finding dealers who regularly handle the type of gun you have and who have established reputations in the collector community. Online forums, collector organizations, and firearms publications are good sources for recommendations. This is also where documentation becomes crucial. Any historical information you can provide about a gun's background can significantly increase its value. Military service records, family history, photographs showing the gun in use, or original accessories like holsters or boxes all add to desirability. I've seen cases where proper documentation doubled or tripled a gun's value by establishing historical significance that wasn't immediately obvious from the gun itself. A seemingly ordinary Colt revolver becomes much more interesting when you can prove it belonged to a frontier sheriff or a famous lawman. But documentation needs to be authentic and verifiable. The market has been burned by fake provenance stories and reproduction accessories passed off as original. Serious collectors are skeptical of dramatic claims unless they're backed by solid evidence. This verification process is another area where expert help becomes valuable. Experienced collectors and dealers know how to spot questionable documentation and can often suggest ways to research and verify historical claims. The regional nature of American history also affects gun values in interesting ways. A revolver with documented Texas history might sell for a premium in Texas, but be worth less in other parts of the country. California collectors pay extra for guns with California history. This geographic factor creates opportunities for both buyers and sellers who understand regional preferences. A gun that seems fairly common in one area might be quite rare and valuable in another. Military-marked guns represent one of the strongest segments of the collector market, but they're also one of the most complex to understand. The United States military used many different firearms over the years, and each type has its own collecting specialty. Cavalry revolvers from the Indian War period are particularly sought after, as are guns that can be documented to specific battles or military units. World War-era firearms are popular with military history enthusiasts. But military collecting requires specialized knowledge to distinguish authentic military guns from civilian guns that have been altered or remarked. Original military markings command huge premiums, while fake military markings can actually reduce a gun's value below civilian examples. This authentication challenge has created a network of experts who specialize in military firearms research. These researchers can often determine not just whether military markings are authentic, but can sometimes trace specific guns to their original military units and service histories. For families dealing with inherited military firearms, this research can uncover fascinating family history, while also maximizing the gun's collectible value. I've seen cases where military research revealed that a family's ancestors served in famous battles or received military decorations that were never mentioned in family stories. The emotional aspect of inheriting firearms can complicate the decision-making process. Many people feel that selling a grandfather's gun would be disrespectful to his memory, even if they have no personal interest in firearms and could use the money. This is a deeply personal decision that families need to make for themselves. But it's worth considering that keeping a valuable gun locked in a closet where it's not appreciated might not be what your ancestor would have wanted. Many collectors are passionate historians who will treasure and preserve significant guns while sharing their knowledge with others. A gun that sits forgotten in storage might be actively researched and displayed by someone who understands its historical importance. There's also the practical consideration that gun values, like any collectible market, can fluctuate over time. While the long-term trend has been upward, there's no guarantee that will continue indefinitely. The current strength in the firearms collector market is driven partly by demographic factors that may change as the baby boom generation ages. Younger collectors often have different interests and may not value the same types of guns that are popular today. This generational shift is already visible in some collecting categories. Traditional sporting rifles that were highly sought after 20 years ago have seen softer demand as younger collectors gravitate toward military surplus and tactical style firearms. But quality always finds buyers in the collectibles market. The finest examples of important firearms will likely remain valuable regardless of changing trends. Just as the finest examples of art, furniture, or automobiles retain value across generations. The key is understanding what constitutes quality in the firearms market and ensuring that significant guns receive proper recognition and documentation before market conditions change. For families making decisions about inherited firearms, the most important step is simply understanding what you have before making any irreversible decisions. Too many valuable guns have been sold for scrap metal prices or lost to neglect because their owners didn't realize what they possessed. Knowledge protects value, whether you ultimately decide to keep guns as family heirlooms or sell them to serious collectors who will appreciate their significance. Your grandfather's revolver might indeed be worth more than his house, but the only way to find out is through careful research and proper identification. If you've inherited firearms, start with documentation. Take photographs, record serial numbers, and seek out experts who specialize in your specific type of firearm. The stories these guns tell about American history often prove more valuable than their monetary worth, but understanding both ensures their preservation. That $850,000 Colt revolver didn't become valuable overnight. The question isn't whether old revolvers can be valuable. The question is whether you'll take the time to find out what yours are really worth.